A homeless woman inherited an old school she didn't even know existed, left behind by a distant relative she never met. At first, it seemed like just another broken-down building. But what she discovered inside the abandoned school would uncover a hidden legacy, expose decades of secrets, and change her life forever. Subscribe now, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Let's get started. Once a vibrant spirit with big dreams, Isabella now found herself sleeping on park benches and scrounging for change just to afford a cup of coffee. Her once comfortable life had unraveled piece by piece, first a layoff, then mounting medical bills, and eventually the eviction notice that sealed her descent into homelessness. But despite it all, she clung fiercely to her dignity and kindness, often giving away her last dollar to someone who seemed worse off. It was on a gray November morning, as she huddled beneath a worn blanket near a bus terminal, that her life took a turn no one could have predicted. A sharply dressed man approached, holding a sealed envelope and asking, "Are you Isabella Carter?" with suspicion in her eyes and weariness in her bones. She nodded. Inside was a legal document that stunned her. She had inherited a property from a distant relative she'd never even heard of. But it wasn't just any property. It was an abandoned schoolhouse, resting on the edge of a small rural town in Vermont. Crumbling, forgotten, and shrouded in mystery. It seemed more burden than blessing. But something about it tugged at her soul. The icy wind nipped at Isabella's cheeks as she stepped off the bus and onto the cracked pavement of Maplewood, a once bustling New England town that had long since faded into obscurity. The directions were vague, scrawled in the corner of the inheritance letter. But the townsfolk were kind. An elderly woman at a nearby bakery pointed her down an overgrown path behind the old church. "There used to be a school there," the woman said, her voice tinged with both nostalgia and something unspoken, maybe sorrow. Isabella pulled her coat tighter and made her way through the frost-bitten trees until she saw it, Maplewood School for the Arts. Though the paint on the sign was so faded it was nearly illegible. The building loomed like a forgotten relic from another time, its red bricks chipped, the windows boarded, and vines creeping across the facade like nature's attempt to claim it once and for all. She stepped closer. Every footstep crunched against dead leaves and broken glass. As she pushed open the warped wooden doors, a gust of cold, dust-scented air met her face. Inside, silence enveloped her like a blanket. But not the comforting kind. It was the type that made your skin crawl. The hallway stretched out before her, dimly lit through broken slats where sunlight pierced in thin, holy beams. Lockers rusted at the edges lined the walls, and faint echoes of laughter from a bygone era seemed to dance in the air. She wandered from room to room, taking it all in. A classroom where desks were still arranged in neat rows, covered in cobwebs. A chalkboard with ghostly remnants of a lesson still visible. Believe in the power of art. A music room, its piano keys yellowed and warped, the strings long since broken. Isabella paused and sat in the center of the old auditorium, where the wooden floor groaned under her weight. The smell of decay lingered, but oddly, so did something else hope. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she imagined the room filled with children's voices, applause, and laughter. Her throat tightened. She hadn't felt warmth like this in years, not even in her memories. But just as quickly as the feeling came, so did her skepticism. "Why me?" she whispered aloud. "Why would someone I never knew leave this place to a homeless woman?" She spent the next hour exploring, aimlessly running her fingers along lockers, flipping through moldy textbooks, and staring at class photos lining the hallway walls. As she passed the final row of pictures, something caught her eye. A photo frame hung crooked, almost as if it had been intentionally moved. Isabella straightened it, but behind it, a slight gap in the wood revealed a hidden notch. Her pulse quickened. She slipped her fingers in and tugged. A section of the wall creaked and gave way, revealing a small hidden cabinet built into the wall itself. Inside was a wooden box, worn, locked, and engraved with the initials A.M. She sat on the cold floor and stared at it. The box felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of stories waiting to be told. She didn't have a key, but the lock was old, and after some fiddling with a bobby pin from her hair, it clicked open. Inside, she found a collection of letters, brittle with age but meticulously preserved in twine. There were also old photographs, newspaper clippings, and at the very bottom, a small leather-bound diary. As she flipped through the pages, her breath caught. We built this school not for profit, but for the children no one else would accept, the ones who were abandoned, broken, or forgotten. If this school ever closes, let it fall into the hands of someone who has known hardship, someone who will understand its soul. Each page unfolded the tale of Amelia Monroe, the founder of the school, and Isabella realized with a jolt her great-aunt. Amelia had been an orphan herself, raised in poverty, and dedicated her life to building a sanctuary for children like her. The school had once been a haven for marginalized youth children with disabilities, those rejected from traditional schools, and those with no homes to return to. The letters were from former students, all expressing their gratitude, many now grown and leading lives that might never have happened without this place. Isabella clutched the diary to her chest. Her eyes burned with tears, not out of pity, but recognition. Amelia's life mirrored her own. The pain, the rejection, the need to matter. She had stumbled into this place expecting rot and loss. What she found was purpose raw, unfiltered, and wrapped in the echoes of those who had once filled these halls. Just then, the floorboard beneath her shifted. Curious, she pried it open. Beneath lay a metal tin, and inside it a thick envelope. Cash, likely thousands of dollars, tucked away for emergencies. But this wasn't what made her gasp. Taped to the bottom of the tin was a yellowed map with markings and annotations in Amelia's handwriting. The final note read, "To the one who finds this, restore what was lost, and the light will return." That night, Isabella didn't sleep. She stayed in the school, wrapped in an old stage curtain she found in the auditorium, lit only by a flickering lantern from the storage closet. But her mind wasn't on comfort. It was alive with possibility. What if she could fix this place? What if she could bring it back, not just the structure, but the heart? And what if, in doing so, she could rebuild herself? This wasn't just an inheritance. This was a calling. And for the first time in years, Isabella answered. In the days that followed, Isabella moved into the school permanently. With no electricity and no running water, it wasn't much, but it was hers. She made a makeshift bed in the old library, using dusty cushions and blankets she found in a locked storage closet. By day, she explored every corner of the building. By night, she pored over Amelia's diary and the letters, piecing together the legacy she had unexpectedly inherited. One morning, while sweeping debris from a stairwell that led to the basement, Isabella noticed something strange, a chill in the air far colder than the rest of the school. The steps creaked under her weight as she descended. The lower level had been mostly ignored since her arrival. It was musty and damp, with exposed brick walls and the faint scent of mildew. At the far end of the hall was a door unlike the others, made of iron, with a rusted bolt across the front. It was locked tight, but next to it on a nearby shelf half covered in cobwebs, was an old keychain. One of the keys was ornate and heavy, with the initials A.M. engraved into its base. Her heart beat faster as she slid the key into the lock. It turned with a reluctant groan. The door creaked open, revealing a hidden room perfectly preserved. Unlike the rest of the school, this room was clean, untouched by time. Wooden shelves lined the walls, stacked with carefully labeled boxes and binders. In the center sat a heavy wooden desk. On it was a single folder, bright red. The label on the front read, "Confidential, Maplewood Trustees, 1963." With trembling hands, Isabella opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, land deeds, and architectural blueprints, but more shockingly, a hidden trust fund registered in the name of the school. The documents outlined the original donation made by Amelia and 2 anonymous benefactors, a sizable sum meant to ensure the school's survival through future hardships. But something was off. The papers detailed a transfer of funds decades earlier, with signatures that didn't match Amelia's or any of the other documented trustees. A particular name repeated itself throughout the file. Thomas Whitaker, a local developer who, according to a newspaper clipping Isabella had found earlier, had tried to buy the land in the 1980s to build luxury condos. Her eyes widened. The trust had been stolen. The school hadn't just been forgotten, it had been sabotaged. Just then, a noise startled her. Footsteps. Not hers? Isabella froze, clutching the red folder to her chest. The basement had no other entrances. The steps echoed again this time, from upstairs. Someone was in the building. She tiptoed out of the secret room, gently closing the iron door behind her. As she crept up the stairs, she could hear muffled voices. Peering around the corner from the stairwell, she saw 2 men in suits standing in the main hallway. One of them was speaking on the phone. She found it, he said. We need to move quickly before she makes it public. Panic surged through her veins. She backed away quietly, descending the stairs as quickly and silently as she could. Back in the basement, she grabbed the red folder and the old metal cash tin, tucking them into a backpack. Who were these men? How did they know what she'd found? The answer hit her like a lightning bolt. Thomas Whitaker's son, the man currently running Maplewood's town planning board, must have learned of the inheritance and feared exposure. The trust fund theft would ruin his family's name and possibly lead to legal action. Isabella had no allies in this town. No one knew her. She was still the homeless woman who showed up out of nowhere and inherited a forgotten school. If those men found her, they could easily take the documents and destroy the only evidence left of what had happened. She needed help. She ran. Out the back door, through the wooded path, past the church, and straight into town. Her breath burned in her lungs as she reached the small public library. Inside, she begged the librarian, a kind woman named Eleanor, for access to a computer and help scanning documents. Eleanor. Seeing the panic in Isabella's eyes and the dust-covered folder in her hands, didn't ask questions. Together, they scanned every page of the red file, the letters, and the map from the hidden tin. Isabella emailed copies to herself and uploaded them to a cloud storage account she'd just created. Then she did something even bolder. She printed 1 letter, the map, and a photo of Amelia Monroe, and taped them to the town's notice board in the library entrance with a handwritten sign. The truth about Maplewood School, hidden trust, stolen legacy, and a community worth saving. By the next day, the whispers had begun. Locals started talking. Some remembered the school's founder. Others vaguely recalled the attempted buyout decades ago. Rumors spread about the mysterious woman living in the abandoned building. One by one, townspeople trickled in to visit the school cautiously at first. A few brought supplies, others brought stories. One elderly man, Henry, stood silently in the hallway for several minutes before quietly saying, "I was one of the first students here. I thought it was all gone." Isabella didn't need to convince them. The truth did the work for her. And as the town stirred to life with curiosity and outrage, Isabella knew the game had changed. She wasn't just the heir to a broken building, she was now the guardian of its truth. And there were people trying to silence her. But what they didn't realize was that Isabella had already been silenced by life too many times. This time she would speak louder. In the days that followed her public reveal, Isabella felt a storm quietly building, not from the skies but from the town itself. At first, people stared. Whispers followed her when she walked into the diner for a cup of coffee. Parents pulled their children closer as if she were still just a homeless woman squatting in a ruin. But beneath that suspicion, something else had begun to stir. Something deeper. Awakening. One morning, she found a folded note slipped under the school's main entrance. It read, "Thank you. My grandmother always said Amelia Monroe saved her life. I thought she was exaggerating. Now I know she wasn't. Lily H." Later that same day, a pickup truck pulled up. Out stepped a tall man in his 60s with paint-splattered jeans and work boots. "I'm Dale. Used to do maintenance here back in the day," he said, pulling off his cap. "Heard you're bringing it back to life." "Thought you could use some help." Isabella was speechless. She simply nodded, and Dale rolled up his sleeves like he had never left. Word spread fast. Former students, curious townsfolk, and even local reporters began showing up. They didn't just want to know about the hidden trust or the stolen legacy. They wanted to know about Amelia, about the children, about what had been lost. But not everyone welcomed the change. Just as support for Isabella's cause grew, so did the resistance. On the third night after her public post, the school's front door was found smashed open, and several of the original documents had been torn and scattered. Thankfully, the scanned versions remained safe, but the message was clear someone wanted her gone. And yet, Isabella didn't run, because something inside her had shifted. For most of her adult life, she had lived on the edges, ignored, invisible, judged. Society looked through her. But now, these people saw her, not just as the heir of a school, not even as the victim of corruption. They saw her as a woman with a voice. It terrified her, and yet it lit a fire she hadn't felt in years. Later that week, a small community meeting was organized in the old town hall. Isabella was invited reluctantly at first. She stood near the back, hesitant to speak until the town clerk called her forward. "What do you plan to do with the property, Ms. Carter?" the mayor asked curtly, arms folded, eyes skeptical. Isabella swallowed hard and stepped up to the microphone. Her palms were sweating. I never planned to be here," she began. "I didn't ask for this, but I think maybe that's why I'm supposed to be here. This school was built by someone who believed in people. No one else believed in orphans, outcasts, the forgotten." She paused and glanced at the crowd. "I know what it's like to be forgotten." Silence filled the room. She continued, stronger now. "But I've read every letter, every note from a child who walked these halls. They're filled with hope, with second chances, with teachers who loved them, fed them, believed in them. We can bring that back, not just for the memory of Amelia Monroe, but for this town, for its future." There were no applause, no cheers, but the silence wasn't rejection. It was reflection. Quiet agreement, soft tears. When she stepped down, a woman approached her, elderly, with silver hair and a cane. She took Isabella's hand and whispered, Amelia saved my sister's life. I have photos you can have, if they'll help rebuild her story." By the end of that week, donations began to trickle in. Old furniture, books, art supplies. A retired music teacher offered to tune the warped piano. A single mother came forward and asked if she could help clean on weekends. And something inside Isabella, something long dead, began to heal. For the first time in years. She bought a mirror and looked at herself. Not just to check her appearance, but to really see. Her eyes no longer looked tired. Her shoulders were no longer slumped. She stood straighter now, even smiled without realizing it. That weekend, she sat in the restored library, now lit with borrowed lamps and smelling of lemon polish, and opened a blank journal. She wrote, "I came here with nothing, and now I have everything money could never buy: belonging, purpose, and a legacy I didn't earn, but will protect with all I have. Amelia. I think you knew someone like me would find this place, and I won't let it be forgotten again." The biggest change, however, came not from the town but from Isabella's own heart. She no longer saw herself as a woman who had fallen through the cracks. She no longer introduced herself with shame. She stopped avoiding eye contact. She didn't just find a building to restore, she found herself within its walls. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a steward, a bridge between a forgotten past and a hopeful future. Winter had tightened its grip on Maplewood, blanketing the school grounds in a soft coat of snow. But inside the once-forgotten building, warmth had returned not just from the portable heaters donated by locals, but from laughter, voices, and life. Isabella stood in the middle of the refurbished auditorium, now swept clean of debris and bathed in golden light from hanging string bulbs. The creaky stage had been reinforced, old curtains stitched back to life by the hands of retired seamstresses who remembered watching their own grandchildren perform in that very room. Paintings from former students adorned the walls, recovered from dusty closets, and revived with care. It wasn't finished. Far from it. The building still needed thousands of dollars in repairs. The roof leaked. The boiler was unreliable. There were fire codes and inspection notices to battle. But Isabella saw none of that now. She saw potential. And so did others. That morning, a woman named Victoria Langston walked through the double doors. She was elegant, mid-40s, and confident, one of the most well-respected community organizers in the state. She'd read about Isabella in the paper, then heard her speech replayed on the local radio. "I wanted to see it for myself," Victoria said, surveying the space. "What you've done here, it's not just restoration. It's revival." Isabella smiled, humble as always. "It's just a start. Amelia did the hard part. I'm just continuing the thread." But Victoria saw more than humble efforts. She saw leadership. She saw the spark of someone who had the heart, pain, and courage necessary to change lives. "I run a non-profit," Victoria said. "We fund community spaces across rural areas, especially those aimed at at-risk youth. I think what you're building here could be something powerful." Isabella froze. "Like what? A community arts center? Counseling, after-school programs, creative therapy, food pantries, maybe even temporary housing one day. You have the bones of it right here. And I believe we can help." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. For months, she had fought alone, scrubbing floors, digging through old files, printing flyers at the library. She had accepted every sandwich, every donated mop, every hour of volunteered labor with quiet gratitude. But this was a real opportunity. Victoria continued. "We'll start with a pilot grant. If it goes well, you'll be eligible for full non-profit status and funding. You'd need a board, of course, and a mission. But most importantly," she paused and looked Isabella straight in the eye, You'd need to be ready to lead it. Those words echoed in Isabella's chest long after Victoria left. That night, she walked the halls of the school alone, her footsteps soft against the polished wooden floor. In her hand, she held the old diary of Amelia Monroe. The pages were worn, but the ink still clear. She stopped at the library window, watching the snow fall gently outside, and opened to one passage she had marked with a paperclip weeks ago. The world doesn't change from the top. It heals from the ground. One child, one soul, one forgotten place at a time. Isabella whispered to the dark. I'm ready now. Amelia. Over the next few weeks, momentum surged. Victoria connected her with legal counsel to begin the process of incorporating the school into a charitable foundation, the Monroe Legacy Center. Isabella was named as acting director. Town leaders who had once doubted her now stood behind her, moved by the outpouring of support. Old students came forward with stories, artifacts, even performances. One man, Caleb, a former drug addict who now taught guitar, offered to run weekly music classes. This place saved me once, he told Isabella. It's time I pay it forward. They began hosting memory nights, where locals could come and share stories of the school, or simply sit in the warmth of community. People cried, laughed, sang, brought photos, told stories they hadn't spoken in decades. A woman donated her late husband's woodworking tools. A former chef offered cooking classes. A teenage girl who had been skipping school asked if she could volunteer to clean and maybe help with art stuff. Each small moment stitched a new thread into the school's reborn soul. But amid the joy, Isabella never forgot the quiet war still rumbling beneath the surface. The Whitaker family, those who had once tried to bury the trust, erase Amelia's impact, and profit from her silence, remained present. They had gone quiet. For now. But Isabella knew better than to believe they had given up. Which is why, during a town-wide open house celebration, she made a bold move, standing at the same podium where Amelia once spoke. Isabella addressed the crowd. This school was nearly destroyed by greed. A secret was buried here, a fund meant to protect this place. It was stolen, hidden, forgotten. But we remember now, and more importantly, we act now, because we are not just rebuilding walls. We are restoring a promise. Cheers erupted. She took a breath and continued. We're filing a legal motion to recover the stolen trust and return those funds to where they were always meant to go, this community. The town erupted in applause. What began as a solitary inheritance had become a collective mission. Isabella was no longer a name on a legal letter. She was a builder of legacies. That evening, as she closed the auditorium doors, a child ran up to her. A boy. No more than 8, wearing a threadbare coat and wide, hopeful eyes. My mom says we're going to come here after school now. She says it's safe. Isabella bent down and smiled, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, sweetheart. It is. And it always will be. The snow began to melt as winter gave way to early spring, revealing the school grounds beneath patches of worn earth, cracked pavement, and tufts of stubborn green pushing through the cold. And much like the land, Isabella was also beginning to thaw. Her days were no longer solitary. She woke up to the scent of brewed coffee made by volunteers in the once-abandoned teacher's lounge. Laughter echoed through the old gymnasium. Children's footsteps pattered down the hallways. The woman who once wandered aimlessly now moved with purpose, clipboard in hand, a smile on her face, and 1,000 things to do. But what had changed the most wasn't her schedule, it was her identity. Isabella had lived so long under the shadow of shame. Homelessness had stripped her of everything society labeled as success, stability, income, family, a title. For years, she believed she was broken, unworthy of being seen. Now, every time she heard someone say, "Miss Carter, can I ask your opinion?" Or "Isabella, do you need help with the fundraiser?" she felt those beliefs dissolving, like ice beneath spring sunlight. One morning, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, something she had avoided for so long. She didn't just glance. She looked, really looked. The dark circles beneath her eyes had softened. The lines on her face were still there, but they looked earned now, not worn. Her cheeks carried color, and her eyes, they glowed with direction. This place had healed more than its walls. It had healed her. But personal growth never comes without challenge. In late March, Isabella received notice that Whitaker & Sons Development had officially filed a cease and desist order against her proposed legal claim for the stolen trust. The legal team argued there was no sufficient evidence proving the misappropriation of funds was intentional or even real. Isabella sat in her office once the principal's room staring at the letter. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of it all. She could lose everything. The funding, the restoration efforts, the very credibility she had fought so hard to earn. But instead of breaking down, she did something she never used to do. She called for help. She contacted Victoria, then the town's pro bono legal team, then Caleb, who had once spent time in prison and now taught music, but had unexpectedly grown passionate about social justice. Together, they formed a community action committee not just to protect the center, but to document every donation, every hour worked, every child helped. They organized a town petition, dozens signed, then hundreds. Former students of Amelia Monroe mailed in testimonials, some handwritten, some printed, all full of gratitude and conviction. Isabella wasn't alone. And more importantly, she wasn't afraid anymore. The more she leaned into her new role, the more her confidence blossomed. She began speaking at local schools about homelessness, not as a victim, but as a survivor. She shared how she'd once lost everything, and how one unexpected letter changed her life not just because of what it gave her, but because of what it revealed inside her, a strength she didn't know existed. She wasn't the same woman who arrived on that first snowy day with a backpack and a broken spirit. She was now a community leader, a speaker, a symbol of resilience. At one event, a young woman approached her with tearful eyes. "My mom was addicted. We lived in our car for 3 years. I never told anyone. But seeing you, seeing what you've done, makes me think maybe I can change things too." Isabella hugged her, holding back tears. "You don't need to be whole to be worthy. You just need to be willing." As spring bloomed, so did the Monroe Legacy Center. One classroom became a free art space for local children. Another was turned into a counseling room. The library was now a warm reading space, open to anyone who needed silence, connection, or simply a place to sit without judgment. Isabella also made a personal decision, one that felt like the last step in reclaiming her identity. She applied to finish her degree. She had dropped out of college years ago, overwhelmed by debt and family hardship. But now, she submitted an application to a local university's community leadership program. Her essay spoke not of dreams, but of purpose, how she intended to spend the rest of her life building bridges for the forgotten. And she was accepted. When the letter came, she stood outside under the old oak tree in front of the school, the same one where Amelia once planted sunflowers with her students. She clutched the acceptance letter to her chest and whispered, "We're just getting started." That evening, she sat alone in the auditorium, the soft hum of life still lingering even after the doors had closed for the night. The stage lights were off, but the stars through the cracked windows offered just enough glow. She walked to center stage, stood in the spotlight, and looked out at the empty chairs. "I used to think I had to be fixed to be seen," she said aloud. Now I know. I just had to show up. And she had, over and over again. Through fear, through loss, through doubt. And in doing so, Isabella Carter didn't just rebuild a school. She rebuilt herself. Spring turned to summer, and the Monroe Legacy Center was blooming both literally and figuratively. The courtyard, once overgrown with thorns and weeds, was now alive with sunflowers and laughter. Children played beneath the old oak tree. Volunteers repainted murals on the brick walls. And Isabella. She had become more than the heart of the place. She was its voice, its memory, its shield. But peace, as she had learned, never comes without challenge. It started with a letter, thick envelope, heavy paper, cold words. You are hereby notified that your occupancy and operations within the Monroe School are in violation of property and financial codes. Unless vacated within 30 days, further legal action will be taken. Whitaker and Sons Development. The name at the bottom, Graham Whitaker, son of Thomas Whitaker. And 2 days later, they came in person. Graham arrived in a black SUV, flanked by 2 sharply dressed men in tailored suits and smug expressions. The same 2 Isabella had seen that night in the school when she first discovered the red folder. They stood in the school's entranceway as if they owned it. This property was never legally transferred, Graham said, his voice slick with entitlement. My father's development firm had a pre-existing agreement. You're squatting on private land? Isabella's voice was calm, but firm. You mean the land your family tried to steal from under an orphan school by hiding a trust meant for children? He smirked. Do you have proof? Oh, I have more than proof, she replied. I have witnesses, scanned documents, and about 300 people in this town ready to testify. Graham leaned in, lowering his voice. You don't know who you're messing with. Isabella looked him dead in the eye and said, Yes, I do, a legacy of greed. But this time, it ends here. The next few weeks moved like a whirlwind. With the help of Victoria Langston, Isabella filed for legal injunction to stop Whitaker's attempts to reclaim the property. Community members rallied. Former students of the school, now teachers, firefighters, business owners submitted formal statements. A retired judge who had once ruled on zoning in Maplewood came forward to admit irregularities in the original land transfer involving the Whitakers, and the media caught wind. A small-town newspaper headline read, Homeless woman turned community. Hero fights developer empire and might just win. Soon, larger outlets called. Isabella gave interviews not for fame, but to tell the truth. She didn't talk about herself. She talked about Amelia, about the forgotten children, about what it meant to rebuild something not just with bricks, but with belief. Then came the court date. The courthouse was packed. Locals filled every pew, spilling into the hallway. Some held signs, Protect Monroe Legacy. Others wore T-shirts that read, We are the forgotten children. Graham Whitaker arrived in an expensive suit, his face tight with frustration. The 2 suited men stood behind him, silent, stone-faced. But Isabella walked in flanked by people from every walk of life. Caleb, the former addict turned music teacher. Eleanor, the librarian who scanned the first set of documents. Dale, the maintenance man. And even little Mia, an 8-year-old whose drawing of the school had gone viral online with the caption, Home is a place with heart. Isabella took the stand. She spoke with no script. She told the judge about the day she received the letter on a freezing bench, about entering the abandoned school, about the secret compartment, the forged signatures, and the money meant for the children that never came. She showed the scanned documents, the diary, the map, and read Amelia's words aloud. If this school ever closes, let it fall into the hands of someone who has known hardship, someone who will understand its soul. Then Witness after witness came forward. A former accountant testified that funds had indeed vanished during a suspicious transfer in the 80s. A teacher read from a letter she had received from Amelia just before her death, expressing fear that those men from the city were circling like vultures. And finally, Graham was asked to speak. He was arrogant, disrespectful. He claimed the documents were emotional relics, not legal proof. The judge listened carefully, and after hours of testimony, deliberation, and silence, he spoke. It is the ruling of this court that the Monroe School and its assets, including the trust established in 1963, were wrongfully diverted by the Whitaker Development Group through forged and unethical means. The trust is hereby reinstated under the Monroe Legacy Foundation. Criminal investigation is recommended for potential financial misconduct by the Whitaker estate. The courtroom erupted in applause. Graham stood frozen. The two suited men turned and quietly exited the room. But Isabella, she stood in stunned silence, tears filling her eyes. For once, not from sorrow, but from justice. That night, the school opened its doors for a celebration. The lights were bright, the auditorium was full, music played, kids danced, parents laughed. Isabella walked to the center of the stage once again, microphone in hand. She looked at the crowd doctors, janitors, teens, elders, artists, and those like her who had once been unseen. Her voice was steady. People once told me this place had no value, that I had no value, but they were wrong. This building held a story, and so did I, and so do all of you. She paused, voice breaking. We weren't saved by money or power. We were saved by remembering who we are when we stand together. The room roared. Then, one by one, candles were lit and passed through the crowd. The room glowed in gold and silence as Caleb stepped on the stage and played an old lullaby on his guitar, the same one Amelia used to sing to her students. Isabella looked out at the sea of flickering lights. She no longer felt invisible. She felt eternal. Isabella's journey teaches us that our worth is not defined by what we own, but by what we choose to fight for. She began with nothing, no home, no family, no future. But through grit, compassion, and community, she became the guardian of a legacy much bigger than herself. The story reminds us that even the most broken places can become sanctuaries of hope when someone believes in their value. That courage is not loud or flashy. It's quiet perseverance, the kind that shows up every day, even when no one's watching. And most of all, it shows that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the dust, waiting for someone who sees not what a place is, but what it could be. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories that will restore your faith in second chances. Click to continue, and if you believe truth, healing, and community matter, don't forget to hit subscribe.